Chapter 1. My own parents sued me over a $460,000 refinance. My brother called me unstable in court, and his therapist wife testified that I was paranoid. What they did not know was that I had already filed a federal complaint after uncovering 14 offshore transfers and 18 suspicious veteran grant files tied to his company. I am Dr. Eliza Maddox. I spent 19 years in federal cyber operations, and the morning my family tried to destroy my credibility was the same morning federal agents walked into the courtroom with a sealed arrest warrant. The courtroom in Fulton County where the trial took place. I stood at the defense table in a navy suit that still smelled faintly of dry cleaning starch hands folded loosely in front of me, shoulders back, breathing steady. I had spent 19 years in federal cyber operations. I knew how to hold my posture when the room turned hostile. Across from me sat my younger brother, Ryan Maddox, 42 founder and CEO of Harbor Crest Advisory Group, a consulting firm he incorporated in Delaware in 2019. His jaw was tight, but he looked confident. Next to him sat his wife, Lauren Maddox, 38, a licensed clinical therapist who specialized in trauma counseling for veterans. Her face carried that practiced empathy she used in marketing photos, soft eyes, sympathetic tilt of the head. Behind them sat my parents. My father, Daniel Maddox, 75, stared at the polished wood rail in front of him, as if it held the answer to everything. My mother, Carol Maddox, 72, folded her hands in her lap and kept her gaze fixed somewhere above my shoulder. Neither of them had looked at me since I walked in. The case caption read, Daniel Maddox versus Eliza Maddox. They were suing me for interfering in what they called lawful family financial decisions, and for what their complaint described as erratic and destabilizing conduct that had harmed the family business. Erratic. Destabilizing. The plaintiff attorney, a tall man in a gray suit, paced slowly as he addressed the judge. He emphasized the $460,000 refinance executed in 2023 on my parents' home in Roswell, Georgia. He stated that I had accessed financial documents without permission and had threatened to report my own family to federal authorities. He suggested that my background in federal intelligence had created a pattern of hypervigilance and paranoia. My sister, he said, has difficulty separating her professional suspicions from ordinary family disagreements. My sister. Lauren took the stand next. She smoothed her skirt and swore in her voice steady. She described me as highly accomplished but emotionally distant. She told the court that in her professional opinion, I exhibited traits consistent with control-oriented personality patterns. She said I struggled to trust and often misinterpreted benign actions as threats. As she spoke, I could feel the shift in the room. A therapist carries credibility in a courtroom. A federal officer on administrative leave does not. Administrative leave. That had come in October 2023 after a local business blog published an article implying that I was entangled in a bitter financial dispute with my own parents. The article hinted at instability. My supervisor had called me into his office and told me that until the situation was clarified, I would be placed on leave. Lauren finished her testimony by saying that my accusations against Harbor Crest Advisory Group were rooted in personal resentment, not evidence. Ryan nodded slightly as she stepped down. The attorney returned to the $460,000 refinance. He said the funds had been lawfully redirected into Harbor Crest to support expansion into federal contracting and veteran wellness initiatives. He said that I, who had not lived in the Roswell house since 2004, had no standing to interfere. No standing. I had helped pay that mortgage from 2012 through 2019 while completing my doctorate at Johns Hopkins and working full-time in cyber defense. I had wired money without asking for recognition. I had trusted my family. When it was my turn to speak, I did not raise my voice. Your Honor, I said my name is Dr. Eliza Maddox. I have worked in federal cyber operations since 2005. In January of this year, I submitted a formal complaint to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division regarding suspicious financial activity connected to Harbor Crest Advisory Group. A murmur rippled through the room. The plaintiff attorney objected, calling it irrelevant and inflammatory. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a calm presence, lifted her hand for silence. "Proceed," she said. "I described the 14 offshore transfers executed in late 2023, each structured just below federal reporting thresholds. I described irregularities in veteran grant disbursements from 2021 through 2023. I did not speculate. I cited dates, amounts, account numbers. I kept my tone even." Ryan's expression hardened. The attorney tried again to interrupt, suggesting that my testimony was proof of my obsessive tendencies. "Your Honor, I said I have provided the court with a copy of the acknowledgement letter from the FBI dated January 18, 2024. The investigation predates today's hearing." I reached into my leather folder and placed the document on the table in front of the clerk. The seal was visible. The case number was printed clearly across the top. I did not look at my parents. The judge reviewed the letter carefully. She asked the clerk to verify the case number. She leaned toward her bench computer and typed something in. The courtroom air seemed to thicken. "Mr. Maddox," she said to Ryan, "is Harbor Crest Advisory Group currently under federal review?" Ryan's attorney began to answer, but the judge held up her hand again. "The question is directed to your client." Ryan swallowed. "We have not been formally charged with anything," he said. That was not the question the judge replied. There was a pause long enough for me to hear the hum of the overhead lights. Before this hearing, Chambers received notification from federal authorities that a sealed warrant may be executed contingent upon confirmation of certain financial representations made in this civil proceeding, the judge said. "I am now confirming that the refinance funds were transferred into Harbor Crest accounts, correct?" Ryan hesitated. "Yes." The word felt heavier than it should have. The courtroom doors opened. 2 agents entered first, both in dark suits, badges clipped discreetly at their belts. Behind them was a third man carrying a slim portfolio. They did not rush. They did not shout. One of the agents approached the bench and handed the judge a document. She reviewed it briefly, then nodded. "Mr. Maddox," she said evenly, "you are to remain seated." Lauren's hand gripped Ryan's sleeve. "This is outrageous," the attorney said, rising halfway from his chair. The agent stepped forward. "Ryan Maddox, you are being detained pursuant to a federal warrant related to suspected violations of wire fraud statutes and conspiracy to defraud a federal program." Gasps spread through the room. I did not move. I felt the weight of every stare, but I did not flinch. For months I had been portrayed as the unstable one, the sister who could not let go, the daughter who had betrayed her family. My mother's face had gone pale. My father stared at the agents as if they were strangers who had wandered in by mistake. Lauren whispered something to Ryan that I could not hear. As the agents guided him to his feet, the judge addressed the courtroom. "This civil matter is hereby stayed pending the outcome of the federal investigation." Stayed. The word echoed. For the first time that morning, my mother looked at me. Her eyes were not angry. They were confused, as if she had just realized that the story she had chosen to believe was incomplete. I did not feel triumph. I felt something quieter, a shift. For months I had been the problem, the paranoid one, the cold daughter who valued rules over family. Now the narrative was cracking in public. Ryan was led toward the door, his expression no longer confident. Lauren remained seated, her composure fractured eyes darting between the agents and the judge. The attorney gathered his files in stiff, controlled movements. I stood exactly where I had been standing at the start of the hearing. The difference was not in my posture. It was in the silence. The room no longer leaned against me. It leaned away from them. The agents paused briefly near the exit, waiting for additional paperwork to be processed. The judge spoke quietly with the clerk. Reporters in the back row began whispering into their phones. I allowed myself one steady breath. This was not the end of anything. It was simply the moment the balance shifted. Chapter 2. It had started long before anyone in that courtroom understood what was happening. The first time I sensed something was wrong was in the spring of 2022 at my parents' house in Marietta, Georgia. The dogwoods were blooming in the yard, and my mother had insisted on hosting Sunday dinner. My older brother, Michael Carter, 43, arrived with a bottle of red wine and the casual confidence of someone who had never been questioned in his own home. His wife, Hannah Carter, 39, followed with a tray of roasted vegetables and that soft, measured smile she used in her therapy practice. Michael had incorporated his company, Blue Harbor Strategic Group, in 2019. At the time, everyone treated it like proof that he was the responsible one, the son who stayed close, the one who understood business. I had been wiring money to my parents for years, especially between 2013 and 2019 when I was finishing my doctorate at Emory while working full-time in federal cyber intelligence. I never asked to be on the deed. I never asked for recognition. That night, the refinance came up casually. Dad carved the roast and said, "We decided to restructure the mortgage. It made sense with rates the way they are." I set my fork down. "Restructure how?" Mom waved her hand like it was minor. "Just a refinance. $460,000. It gives us flexibility." I felt the number land heavier than the way she said it. $460,000 was not flexibility. It was a shift. Michael poured himself more wine. "Blue Harbor is expanding. We are positioning for federal contracts tied to veteran reintegration services. The refinance helps with capital flow." I looked at him. "The house was in your name now." He shrugged. "Technically, 65% of the equity is now under Blue Harbor Strategic Group. It is cleaner for tax purposes." 65%. My name had never been on the deed, but there had been a long-standing understanding that the house would be divided equally in estate planning. That understanding had evaporated without conversation. "You did not think to mention that before signing?" I asked. Mom leaned forward. "Eliza, you do not live here. You have your own life in Atlanta. You do not need this house." "That was not the point." Hannah spoke next, her tone calm, professional. "Sometimes when people have high-pressure careers, they develop a heightened sensitivity to perceived threats. It can make normal financial decisions feel personal." I stared at her. "Are you diagnosing me at Sunday dinner?" She smiled softly. "I am just saying that not everything is an attack." Dad cut in before I could respond. "Your brother understands business in a way you never wanted to. You chose intelligence work. He chose to build something here." "I chose to serve," I said quietly. Mom sighed. "And we are proud of you. But you are strong. You can take care of yourself." Michael stayed. He sacrificed opportunities to be near us. Sacrificed. Michael met my eyes. "You left, Liza. You always leave." The implication hung there. That distance was abandonment. That proximity was virtue. I drove back to Atlanta that night, replaying the conversation. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was reacting emotionally. Maybe I had let my training bleed into family life. For months, I tried to let it go. Then, in February 2023, I reviewed the property records online. I did it out of curiosity, I told myself, just to see how the refinance had been structured. My stomach tightened as I scrolled. The refinancing documents showed the $460,000 loan issued in late 2022. 65% of the equity transferred as collateral interest to Blue Harbor Strategic Group. My parents had signed a limited power of attorney, allowing Michael to execute certain financial documents on their behalf. I called Dad that evening. "Why was there a power of attorney involved?" I asked. "It was simpler that way," he replied. "Michael handles paperwork faster than we do. Did you understand that 65% of the house equity is now tied to his company?" There was a pause. He cleared his throat. He explained it to us. It is all temporary. Temporary is not what the filing says. Eliza, Dad said your brother would not take advantage of us. I am not accusing him. I am asking if you understood what you signed. Mom's voice came through in the background. She is doing it again, turning everything into an interrogation. I close my eyes. I am trying to protect you. From what Mom asked now on speaker. From your own brother. From exposure, I said carefully. If Blue Harbor fails or is sued, that 65% is vulnerable. Michael called me an hour later. You pulled property records, he said without greeting. They are public. You do not trust me. Trust has nothing to do with clarity. He laughed once, sharp. You always talk like that, like you are cross-examining everyone. I am asking for transparency. He lowered his voice. You left this family a long time ago. Do not come back now pretending to guard it. The accusation cut deeper than I expected. In the fall of 2023, another layer surfaced. While reviewing publicly available filings for Blue Harbor, I noticed a series of transfers made between March and November 2023. 14 transactions wired to accounts in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. Each transfer was just below reporting thresholds that typically trigger automatic scrutiny. I stared at the numbers on my screen. The company had reported $3.8 million in revenue for 2022. It had positioned itself as a consultant in veteran grant allocation. One program in particular caught my attention, a federal initiative supporting adaptive housing modifications for injured service members. I recognized the grant structure. I had worked adjacent to similar funding models in my career. I cross-referenced names. One of the recipients listed in Blue Harbor's promotional material appeared in federal disbursement records with slightly altered identifiers. It could have been clerical error, or it could have been something else. In November 2023, a local business blog ran a piece titled Cybersecurity Executive, Locked in Bitter Family Dispute Over Georgia Property. It described me as combative and suggested I had attempted to block legitimate expansion of my brother's company. My supervisor called me the next morning. Eliza, this is a distraction, he said. Until we sort this out, you will be placed on administrative leave. Administrative leave felt like exile. When I confronted Michael about the offshore transfers, we were standing in my parents' kitchen. What are the 14 wires from this year, I asked, sliding printed copies across the counter. He barely glanced at them. International consulting. To whom? He shrugged. You would not understand the strategic layer. Hannah stepped in, hands folded. This fixation is not healthy. You are drawing connections without context. There is context, I said. Federal funds were involved. Mom's eyes filled with frustration. Why can you not just let your brother build something? You do not need this money. You have your own career. It is not about me needing money. Then what is it about, Dad demanded. It is about risk. Legal risk. Exposure. Mom shook her head. You think in threats. We think in family. That was the divide. Family used as a shield. Logic treated as hostility. That night, alone in my apartment, I questioned myself. Maybe I was projecting patterns that were not there. Maybe 14 transfers meant nothing. Maybe the refinance was harmless. Maybe I had lost the ability to see ordinary life without scanning for anomalies. But numbers do not soften when you wish them to. I reopened the filings. I traced the dates. March 14th, April 22nd, May 19th. Each amount consistent. Each destination slightly varied, but linked through intermediary banks. My heart did not race. It slowed. This was not paranoia. It was structure. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the spreadsheet again. 14 transactions in 2023. Each one deliberate. Each one just small enough to avoid automatic reporting. And for the first time, the argument at Sunday dinner felt less like family tension and more like the surface of something deeper. Chapter 3. I stopped looking at it as a family dispute and started looking at it as a pattern. Blue Harbor's strategic group had reported $3.8 million in revenue for 2022. That number alone was not suspicious. Consulting firms can scale quickly, especially when tied to federal programs. What bothered me was the structure underneath it. I scheduled a meeting with a former colleague, Daniel Brooks, 53 now, an assistant United States attorney based in Atlanta. We met in a quiet conference room in a federal building downtown in early January 2024. I brought printed copies of public filings, bank routing summaries, and grant allocation data that anyone with patience could access legally. He flipped through the pages slowly. "You are not asking me to access anything classified, right?" "No," I said. "Everything here is public record. Corporate filings, property transfers, grant disbursement summaries." He looked up. "And your brother knows you are doing this. He thinks I am overreacting." Daniel leaned back. "This is not about sibling rivalry, is it?" "It stopped being about that a while ago." I showed him the 14 transfers from 2023, each amount just under reporting thresholds that trigger automatic scrutiny under federal banking compliance rules. Different destinations, same pattern. He tapped one line with his pen. "These were wired within days of federal grant deposits." "Yes." "And you are saying Blue Harbor was an intermediary for veteran housing assistance?" "That is how they marketed themselves." Daniel did not respond immediately. He turned to the next section. "There are 18 grant recipient identifiers here that look irregular," he said. "Names, slightly altered social security digits transposed." "Identity masking," I replied quietly. He closed the folder. "I cannot open a formal case based solely on suspicion," he said, "but I can forward this to financial crimes for preliminary review. If there is misuse of federal funds, you are talking about wire fraud, possibly identity theft, maybe conspiracy to defraud a federal program." The words felt heavy but steady. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. I nodded. "I am not asking you to go after my brother," I said. "I am asking you to look at the numbers." He studied me for a moment. "You understand what happens if this moves forward?" "I do." In late January 2024, I received confirmation that the FBI Financial Crimes Division had opened a preliminary investigation. I was instructed not to access any private systems, not to conduct independent probing, and not to alert potential subjects. I followed every instruction. This was not about playing detective. It was about letting the system work. 2 weeks later, an analyst from the division called me. "This is Agent Laura Chen," she said. "We are reviewing the materials you submitted. There is one recipient whose case stands out. Henry Lawson, 67, Army veteran. Injured in Iraq." I recognized the name from the spreadsheet. "His file shows a disbursement of $62,000 allocated for adaptive home modifications," she continued. "The funds were transferred to Blue Harbor for facilitation. There is no record of work completed." I felt a tightening in my chest. "Has Mr. Lawson been contacted?" I asked. "We are in the process." I requested permission to reach out as a private citizen. After clearance, I called the number listed in the public record. A man answered on the third ring. "This is Henry." "Mr. Lawson, my name is Eliza Carter. I am calling about the adaptive housing grant you applied for." There was a pause. "Is this about the ramp?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He exhaled slowly. "They told me paperwork got delayed. That was months ago." We agreed to meet at a diner in Decatur. He arrived with his wife, Margaret. He moved carefully, favoring his left leg. He had a quiet dignity about him, the kind that does not beg for sympathy. "I do not want trouble," he said as we sat down. "I just want the house safe for her." Margaret squeezed his hand. They said 62,000 was allocated, I said gently. Did any contractors ever come to assess the property? No, he replied. We filled out forms. We sent in medical documentation. Then nothing. We kept calling. Blue Harbor said funds were in process. He looked embarrassed. I thought maybe I had done something wrong. You did not, I said. Margaret's voice trembled slightly. We almost refinanced ourselves in August because we thought the grant had fallen through. We did not want to lose the house. August 2023. One of the 14 offshore transfers had occurred that same week. I drove home that night with a clarity I had not felt before. This was no longer about 65% of my parents' equity or sibling rivalry, or who had stayed in Georgia and who had left. This was about a man who had trusted a system. Over the next several weeks, the FBI uncovered additional irregularities. Not just Henry Lawson, 18 cases with inconsistencies, some smaller amounts, some larger, all routed through Blue Harbor as an intermediary consultant. I confronted Michael one last time before the civil hearing. We stood in the driveway of my parents' house. There are veterans who never receive the funds allocated in their names, I said. He stared at me like I had crossed an unforgivable line. You went to the feds. I went to the law. He stepped closer. You are destroying this family. I am asking questions. You always do this. You take a small issue and turn it into a federal investigation. It stopped being small when $62,000 meant the difference between someone keeping their home or not. He ran a hand through his hair. You do not understand business pressure. There are timing gaps, temporary reallocations to offshore accounts. He looked away. Mom and Dad signed off on the structure, he said. They knew equity was tied to growth. They did not know about the transfers. He hesitated. They trusted me. That sentence lingered. Later that week, Hannah called me. What you are doing is obsessive, she said. What I am doing is legal. You are interpreting normal accounting movement as criminal intent. 18 files have discrepancies. Silence. You are making this worse than it is. For whom? She did not answer. In February 2024, Agent Chen informed me that sufficient evidence had been gathered to seek a warrant contingent upon confirmation of financial representations under oath. The upcoming civil hearing would provide that opportunity if statements made in court contradicted federal filings. We need to establish intent and misrepresentation, she said. If your brother confirms that refinance funds were transferred into Blue Harbor for specific uses that do not align with federal grant conditions, it strengthens the case. I understood then why timing mattered. The hearing was not just a family dispute, it was a legal hinge. The investigation had moved beyond suspicion. Bank records, grant allocations, corporate filings, all aligned in a pattern that pointed to structured transactions designed to evade oversight. This was not about me being strong or distant or controlling. This was about whether people like Henry Lawson could rely on a system that promised them support. The night before the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table with the folder that would later rest on the courtroom desk. I thought about calling my parents. I thought about asking them one last time if they understood what was happening. Instead, I closed the folder. If I withdrew now, the case would stall. The transfers would remain technical anomalies. The veterans would remain statistics. In early March 2024, Agent Chen called again. The warrant is prepared, she said. Execution is pending confirmation in court. I thanked her. When I hung up, I did not feel vindicated. I felt the weight of inevitability. The system had been set in motion, and there was no turning back. Chapter 4. The cost of that motion began long before the hearing. In October 2023, my supervisor called me into his office on the 9th floor of the federal building in downtown Atlanta. His tone was measured careful, the way people speak when they are about to distance themselves. "Eliza, until this family dispute is resolved, you will be placed on administrative leave." "For how long?" "Indefinite. We cannot have active personnel publicly tied to allegations involving financial misconduct." "I am the one reporting misconduct." "I understand that. But perception matters." Perception. By the end of that week, my badge access was suspended. My name was removed from an internal task force briefing. Colleagues who had once shared coffee with me now avoided eye contact in the hallway. At a networking event in mid-November, a woman I had worked with for years hesitated before shaking my hand. "I saw the article," she said. "I hope everything works out." So did I. The local business blog had updated its story. It now implied that I had tried to leverage my federal connections to intimidate my own family over money. Money. At Thanksgiving, Caleb stood in my parents' dining room and raised his voice for the first time in front of extended relatives. "You are doing this because you want control," he said. "You think if you cannot own the house, no one can." I kept my tone steady. "I am asking for transparency." He laughed harshly. "You do not care about Mom and Dad. You care about being right." My aunt looked at me as if I were the aggressor. My mother leaned forward. "Why can you not just let this go, Eliza? You have your own career. You do not need our house." "It is not about needing it." "Then what is it about?" "It is about risk, legal exposure, federal funds." Caleb slammed his glass down. "There you go again. Federal. Investigation. You always escalate." My father spoke more quietly, but his words cut deeper. "You have always been this way. Cold, analytical. You think strength means never bending." I felt the familiar pull of doubt. Was I bending too little? Later that night, my sister-in-law called. "This fixation is not healthy," she said. "You are isolating yourself. Trauma work teaches us that hypervigilance can damage relationships." "Is that what you think this is?" I asked. "I think you are projecting threat where there is none." There was always that suggestion that my training had broken something inside me. In early January 2024, I met again with Daniel Brooks at the federal office. "They are pushing back hard," I told him. "They will," he replied. "Once people feel exposed, they go on offense." My parents could be implicated. "At this stage, the focus is on financial conduct and misrepresentation. We follow evidence, not emotions." "Is there any way to contain this?" "If crimes were committed, containment is not the objective." His clarity was both reassuring and terrifying. On a gray afternoon in February, Caleb confronted me outside a coffee shop near my apartment. "You went to the FBI," he said without greeting. "I went to the law. You think that makes you righteous. It makes me responsible." He stepped closer. "You are about to drag Mom and Dad into federal court. They signed documents they did not fully understand. They trusted me, and I trusted you." He shook his head. "You are betraying your own family." The word lingered. Betrayal. I had always believed loyalty meant protecting those you love. Now I was being told that protection looked like silence. That night I sat alone in my living room, the city lights filtering through the blinds. For the first time I considered withdrawing my cooperation. If I stepped back, the investigation might lose momentum. The civil case might dissolve into mediation. My parents could avoid subpoenas. I imagined my mother sitting under oath, confused by legal terminology. I imagined my father's pride cracking in a federal courtroom. I felt the weight of that possibility. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was Grant Holloway, a colleague from my Department 50. "I read the filings," he said. "And I did not believe the blog, but I needed to see the numbers. I exhaled slowly. And there are patterns, structured transfers. This is not a misunderstanding. You are not worried about associating with me. He let out a small laugh. I work in cyber intelligence. If I am afraid of numbers, I am in the wrong field. His support was quiet but solid. You are not unstable, he added. You are methodical. I did not realize how much I needed to hear that. Over the next week, the FBI finalized its request for a warrant contingent on statements to be made in the civil hearing. Daniel called to confirm. The paperwork is ready, he said. Execution will depend on confirmation under oath. I understand. You are certain you want to proceed. I looked at the folder on my kitchen table, the same folder that had cost me my badge access, the same folder that had fractured family dinners. Yes, I said. That evening, my mother left a voicemail. We are scared, she said softly. Your brother says you are trying to ruin him. I do not recognize what is happening. I replayed the message twice. I did not call back. Instead, I drove to Marietta the night before the hearing. I did not go inside the house. I sat in my car across the street watching the porch light glow against the dark. I remembered summers in that yard. I remembered my father teaching me how to ride a bike. I remembered my mother telling me I could be anything. I wondered when strength had become synonymous with distance in their minds. My phone buzzed again. It was Daniel. Everything is set for tomorrow, he said. Stay within the record. Let the process work. I will. After we hung up, I stared at the house one last time. I was not trying to destroy my family. I was refusing to shield them from consequences. The next morning, I dressed in a Navy suit and drove toward the courthouse. The hearing would not just determine a civil claim. It would confirm whether the system had enough evidence to move forward. And I knew that once we stepped into that courtroom, every argument, every accusation, every dinner table confrontation would compress into a single moment of truth. Chapter 5. The moment arrived faster than I expected, not with drama, but with procedure. I walked into the DeKalb County Courthouse on a damp March morning in 2024 with a thin folder pressed against my ribs and the kind of calm that only comes when you have already survived the worst conversations. My name is Dr. Tessa Rowland. I was 45 that year, and I had spent 2 decades working in federal cyber intelligence, the kind of work that teaches you to respect paper more than promises. My parents were seated 2 rows back, close together, but not touching. My father, Martin Rowland, 74, stared at the floor as if it might open and swallow him. My mother, Jean Rowland, 71, kept twisting a tissue in her fingers until it looked like a rope. My brother Evan Rowland, 41, sat at the plaintiff table with his attorney spine-straight chin lifted, performing confidence for the room. His wife, Kara Rowland, 38, sat beside him in a cream blouse and a neutral expression she had perfected in her counseling practice. She was licensed in Texas. She specialized in trauma recovery. She had taught people how to breathe through panic while she built a life that depended on other people staying confused. The hearing began like any civil proceeding. Their attorney repeated the story they had been pushing since the refinance. I was obsessed. I was unstable. I was retaliating because I could not tolerate not being in control. He mentioned the $460,000 refinance in late 2022 on my parents' home in Marietta. He mentioned the equity transfer, 65% tied to Evan's firm, North Shore Benefit Consulting, LLC, incorporated in Delaware in 2019. He framed it as strategic planning, a son helping aging parents, a sister who could not handle not being needed. When it was time for testimony, the judge asked questions with patience that felt sharper than aggression. She asked Evan to confirm under oath that the refinance funds had moved into North Shore's accounts and had been used to expand services connected to federal grant facilitation for veterans between 2021 and 2023. Evan answered yes. He said it smoothly, like a man answering a question he had rehearsed in a mirror. The judge asked him to confirm that his company had served as an intermediary consultant for a federal housing modification program, that funds were routed through his firm before contractors were paid. Evan answered yes again. Kara's fingers tightened around a pen. The judge paused, glanced down at a document on her bench, then looked up. She told the courtroom to remain seated. I felt the shift in the air before the doors opened. It is strange how a room can change without anyone speaking, like weather moving in. 2 federal agents entered, dark suits, badges visible. Not theatrical, not rushed. One approached the bench and handed the judge a sealed packet. She read it, nodded once, then addressed Evan directly. "Mr. Rowland," she said, "please stand." Evan's attorney started to rise. The judge lifted her hand. "Sit." Evan stood slowly, confusion blooming across his face, as if the world had failed to follow the script he wrote. An agent stepped forward and spoke with calm precision. "Evan Rowland, you are being detained pursuant to a federal warrant related to suspected wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud a federal program." My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a gasp. It was the noise of a person realizing that denial has an expiration date. Kara's face went pale. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, then she closed them again. Her eyes flicked to Evan's attorney, searching for an exit in someone else's expertise. Evan looked at me. Not angry, not pleading, just stunned, as if he had genuinely believed that I would stop the consequences from happening, because that is what I had always done. I had always absorbed discomfort. I had always softened edges. I had always been the strong one who made things easier for everyone else. I did not move. I did not smile. I did not give him anything he could call cruelty later. The agent instructed Evan to place his hands behind his back. The cuffs clicked closed. The sound was small, almost polite, and that made my throat tighten. A quiet ending to a long pattern. The judge announced that the civil matter was stayed pending the federal investigation. She warned the parties about interfering with federal proceedings. Her voice was steady, indifferent to family narratives, loyal only to the structure of the law. As Evan was led out, I watched my parents' faces. My father looked older in the span of a minute. My mother stared at the door as if she could will it shut and reverse what she had just witnessed. The room did what rooms do when the story changes. People adjusted. They leaned away from Evan's empty chair and toward the new reality. Outside reporters gathered near the steps. They asked questions in quick bursts. How long had I known? Did I regret it? Was I happy? I kept walking. I drove back to Atlanta alone, hands fixed, at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, heart steady but heavy. I did not feel triumphant. I felt like someone had finally stopped asking me to carry a lie. By that afternoon, practical consequences followed. Federal authorities moved to freeze accounts associated with North Shore Benefit Consulting, LLC. It was not dramatic. It was compliance signatures, electronic holds. The kind of consequence that does not need raised voices to be final. Within 2 days, my parents called. My mother's voice shook. She asked why I had not warned her. I told her I had tried, that I had asked questions for months, that every time I asked, they told me I was overreacting. My father got on the line. He asked if they were going to lose the house. I told him the truth. Anything tied to the refinance would be reviewed. The law makes room for context, but it does not erase signatures. It does not undo documents because the people who signed them regret trusting the wrong person. He whispered that he did not understand. I wanted to say I am sorry. Instead, I said I love you and I cannot lie to protect what is hurting other people. The call ended in silence. In April 2024, I cut contact, not as punishment. As a boundary, every conversation became an attempt to pull me back into my old role. They wanted me to soothe the shame they were feeling. They wanted me to reassure them that they were still good people, that this was somehow not their responsibility, that the story could be reframed. I could not do it. I stopped answering calls. I blocked numbers. I let emails sit unread. I told myself that if they ever reached out with accountability instead of blame, I would consider what came next. They never did. In June 2024, the Texas Licensing Board took action against Kara. Her license was suspended pending investigation tied to evidence that her clinic documentation had been used to support false records connected to grant recipients. It was not revenge, it was consequence, a professional system responding to harm. In September 2024, a federal grand jury returned an indictment: wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. The words were printed in public documents that anyone could read. The numbers were there, the structured transfers, the altered identifiers, the way money traveled under the cover of family language and wellness branding. People asked me if I felt vindicated. I did not. I felt tired. But it was a clean tired, the kind that comes after you stop holding your breath. In late 2024, my administrative leave ended. A formal internal review concluded that I had acted within legal and ethical boundaries. My clearance remained intact. My record was not stained. The damage from gossip did not vanish overnight, but the facts did what feelings could not. They held. One evening in December, Grant Hollis, a colleague who had kept his distance after the blog story, sent a short message. "I was wrong. I should have believed you earlier." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "Thank you for saying that. It was not forgiveness I needed. It was acknowledgement that I had not imagined the pattern." In January 2025, I filed the paperwork for Sentinel Shield Foundation. I built it because I could not forget the people whose names sat behind those numbers, the veterans and seniors who believed the system would protect them, the families who nearly lost their homes because someone with a polished voice told them to wait just a little longer. Sentinel Shield connects people to legal resources. It teaches them what to look for in a refinance document. It helps them understand that pressure and paperwork are often paired for a reason. It offers protection without shame. I never received a real apology from my parents, not the kind that starts with "I was wrong" and ends with "I will not do it again." I received explanations. I received tears. I received messages that tried to fold me back into the family story as the difficult daughter who made things worse by refusing to stay quiet. Evan never apologized either. Through his attorney, he framed everything as miscommunication and business pressure. Kara stayed silent publicly. Silence is not always humility. Sometimes it is strategy. I did not rebuild my family, I rebuilt my boundaries. Some nights I still think about my parents sitting behind my brother in that courtroom, and I wonder how many times they told themselves that love meant choosing the child who stayed closest. I wonder how many times they confused loyalty with denial. Then I think about the grant recipients who were never supposed to be collateral damage. I think about what would have happened if I had stayed quiet. If you have ever been called cold because you asked for clarity, or accused of betrayal because you set a boundary, tell me in the comments what your moment of truth was. When did you realize that keeping the peace was costing you your safety? And if you want more stories like this, the kind where the truth has a structure and consequences are real, stay with me here. You are not alone, and silence is not the same as strength.